We are live. Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for joining us here at this South by Southwest panel. We are, I think, collectively just very, very honored that the organization South by Southwest is as invested in talking about nature-based solutions as we are, something very dear to our hearts and also imperative for this planet. So we're going to dive right in. We have a lot to talk about today. We're going to start with introductions. I am Dr. Rae Wynn Grant. I'm the moderator of this amazing panel of brilliant, brilliant scientists. I am a wildlife ecologist myself. I'm a faculty member at UC Santa Barbara. I am also a science communicator. I work on several different digital series and television series, including Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, Protecting the Wild, which I co-host, which is on NBC and streams on Peacock. And I will pass it on to Jack.
My name's Jack Gilbert. I'm a professor, weirdly, of oceanography and pediatrics, which means I really shouldn't be up on this stage, I think. I think I'm the world's first oceanographic pediatrician, or maybe pediatric oceanographer. But either way, I study bacteria, microbes in virtually every environment on Earth, and have focused exclusively on trying to integrate microbiology into conservation management. So I'm really excited to be here. It's an opportunity to raise the microbiome flag for conservation management and put a little spice into the setting.
Brilliant. Okay, next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Walzer. I'm a wildlife veterinarian by training. I'm the executive director of health at the Wildlife Conservation Society, based out of our historic headquarters in New York. I'm a professor for conservation medicine, and I've moved from being, a classic wildlife veterinarian doing all the really fun stuff, capturing and collaring animals, into working a lot on the interface between livestock, humans, and wildlife, and the spillover of pathogens in the last 10 years, probably.
Last but not least.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for braving the crowds and fighting the line to get in here. Glad you made it. I'm Nadine Lamberski. I'm the Chief Conservation and Wildlife Health Officer for San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance. I'm also a wildlife veterinarian, but I have shifted my focus, just like Chris has over the decades that we've been in this field. So the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance is the umbrella organization for the San Diego Zoo and the San Diego Zoo Safari Park. So hopefully you've heard of those institutions. Hopefully you've been to visit. I oversee a team of scientists, engineers, wildlife health professionals, and conservation practitioners. We work at the zoo and the safari park, but we also work in 8 locations around the world. We partner with governments, universities, other NGOs, and local communities to strengthen capacity and to assist in addressing some of the most pressing issues facing biodiversity in those regions.
So you heard it here, folks. We have Scripps Institute, or we have Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, we have Scripps, we have Wildlife Conservation Society, and San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance. So if any of these organizations seem like orgs that you'd love to learn more about, partner with, develop collaborations with, please grab any of us after this panel, and we'd love to keep talking to you. So we're going to dive right in. We're really going to start with some overarching big picture questions. We're going to show a little bit of media about halfway through to give you a visual idea of some of the concepts that we're talking about. And then we're going to close out with a little bit smaller picture, some actionable things that we want you all to take away from this. And so we're going to go in reverse order. I'm going to start with you, Nadine, but just to open us up, I want you to kind of give us your 2 cents, and then you all as well. Why are we focusing today on scientific and technological innovations for biodiversity?
Great question, Ray. So I guess I'd like to ask all of you to reflect back on your childhoods and your experiences with nature. And how many of you remember nature differently than you experience it today? For example, were there more birds when you were younger? Were there more butterflies and bees? How many of you have witnessed that decline in nature over the years? Great. So I'm not aging anyone out here, but since 1970, over 70% of wildlife populations have declined. And we're currently, the decline of species is occurring faster than any other time in our history. And in fact, there are estimated to be 1 million species, that's plants and animals, that are threatened with extinction. So the reason we want to talk to you today is because of the speed and scale of biodiversity loss. We need tools in our toolbox to get ahead of this crisis. We need an edge. We need more than traditional science, but we also need to protect nature. So with that, I'll turn it to Chris.
Yeah, and I don't want to sort of lay it on and sort of be the downer, but I think all of you are aware, not only do we experience this massive loss of biodiversity across all the places. In our case, we work in 55 countries around the world. Basically, everywhere we work, we're seeing this massive loss of biodiversity. But of course, it's not only the loss of biodiversity, it's really a polycrisis of an intertwined crisis that we have to deal with. We have climate emergency, we have massive inequities, and with the emergence of infectious diseases and also non-infectious diseases increasing everywhere. So, and I could go on with that list, right? I'm sure each and every one of you would come up with a few more of these crises that we're facing at the same time. And they're not independent, they're reinforcing, and they're tightly entwined. So this is sort of the background in which we have to work. And the loss that we're seeing is, as Nadine has already brought up, it's not only the elephant and the gorilla, the most charismatic ones everyone knows about. You know, you turn on your news, there'll be some story about elephants being decreasing, or lions or something. But it's a lot of many invertebrates, microbes, which Jack is going to tell us more about, that are disappearing at a rate that has accelerated in my lifetime massively. And what's important is that all these functions, these importance of biodiversity is not in itself because it's nice, it's because it's foundational for our health and well-being. Absolutely everything we have on this planet needs that background, that foundational importance of functioning in intact biodiversity. Without that, nothing works, right? And you can just go down go down to the river, walk along the river. You know that your river is only going to be as pleasant as it is because of massive efforts to maintain the biodiversity within it and around it. So I'll let you tackle the microbiome and
I'll riff on that a little bit. You know, soil is also incredibly important, and it's being degraded hugely. The world is losing its soil. And why is soil important? Because it's a key component of our food security. It's a key driver of the things which we as a species think we need out of the world. That's food, that's energy, that's resources. And so maintaining the integrity of our soil is maintaining the integrity of our species on this planet. And we are losing it at record-breaking levels. It's estimated by 2050, some parts of the world will be devoid of all productive topsoil, because it's being eroded, it's leaving that system, it's being overheated, there's too much moisture, too much rainfall that's letting it drift away, and the agricultural practices that we put in place are just ripping it out of the soil and leaving it dry, dead, and pointless. So we are focused on those processes as well. And we're also looking at what's going on inside your bodies. Every single one of you has around 40 trillion bacterial cells, and some of those species are unique to you. And in fact, there are groups of bacteria called Bifidobacterium longum. I don't have any cool names like lion or tiger, but it's a bacteria, right, which encompasses more biological diversity than pretty much everything you can see with your eyes. In fact, one species of bacteria called E. coli, everyone's probably heard of that from your lab classes, right? E. coli, there are 65,000 genomes of E. coli in the database. Some of those differ by the same level of genetic diversity, up to 40% of their genes are completely different. If I took Ray and we suffered 40% genetic differentiation, I'd be a fungus and she'd be a human, right? That's how much of a differentiation there is in one species of bacteria, one species. So all of your little lions and tigers and bears, oh my, are completely pointless. It's all about the microbes. There's one species, Bifidobacterium longum, that lives inside your gut. When you're a baby, that's the only thing that can degrade the sugars in mother's breast milk, right? So if you don't have the right kind of species of bacteria in your intestine when you're growing up, you're going to suffer from not being able to digest that really vital food early in life. These are key precepts. The things that you're doing to your bodies have changed and threatened the extinction of certain species which we come to rely on. So inside your bodies, in the soil, in the oceans, in the rainforests and the jungles, in the coral reefs, we are doing things which are eroding the capacity of this planet to keep us alive. And if you don't care about anything else, care about the future of your species, because that's the thing which is probably the most important to most of humanity. So these things are really vital, and microbiology is central to it.
We may or may not backstage argue about charismatic megafauna versus microbes, but amplifying everything that our panelists have said and staying on this first topic a little bit longer, panelists, we're talking about scientific and tech innovations for protecting and enhancing biodiversity, but let's just clarify what we mean when we say tech. Are we talking about the tech industry, which has had a lot of talks here, or what is it? Whoever wants to take this one.
I'll jump in just briefly and say that technology to me is whatever tools I can find useful to achieve my goals and ends. That can be data science, that can be leveraging artificial intelligence and machine learning to identify the characteristic traits of a system which I should protect in order to make sure it's stable and resilient. That means leveraging cameras and data recorders, even microphones, to ensure that we can accurately and in a sophisticated way, manage the data flow for a particular ecosystem so that it can be valuable to us. And then everything, even down to ensuring that we use our phones correctly to record and identify species. Tech is vital to the success of our mission.
Would you like to add, Chris?
No, I think what's interesting is the point about the industry versus there's a lot of tech being. A lot of us work in a kind of a niche thing. There's a lot of conservation work ongoing across the globe, but still compared to other industries, we're kind of still niche. So a lot of the tech that's being developed is being developed in academic institutions in collaborations with government funding, public funds, to develop these products that we need. And a lot of the products that we need are also kind of not that useful out here in Austin, right? We want it to be, you'll always recognize an ecologist or a wildlife veterinarian, the first thing they do when they get a piece of tech, someone gives them the first thing they'll do, they'll shake it and they'll see if it's robust and they'll see if it's waterproof and can you chew on it and so on. So there's a lot of stuff that we need which really is not going to have a great market, right? We all are going to use it. So that's a bit of a constraint that we face versus some of the more broader applicable tech. And then we have some really unique needs as well. You pointed out microphones. I'm thinking about our buoys out in the New York Bight to record whales, which then trigger ship traffic, reduce the speed of ship traffic, right? These are massive things. There's no market in them in that sense, right? These are huge pieces of tech built by public funding that enable the protection of, for example, the northern right whale.
Well, you guys are correct. I think you did a good job answering that. I just wanted to add, and actually it's a plea for those of you in the audience that may have, may work at a tech company. As was said, we use a lot of off-the-shelf products, and we alter them to suit our needs. It would be great if there was some conservation-forward technology, if there was technology built around this sector for specific purposes so we don't have to disassemble what was created and repurpose it. So just wanted to throw that out there.
So we're excited to blow your minds with some of the solutions that are in action at each of these institutions. But before we do that, I think we should take another moment to talk about the issue, the problem. We did big picture, but if I were to pose the question to this panel, what are today's biggest threats to biodiversity? Can you all get a little bit more specific on that? We're going to start actually with Chris, Nadine, and then Jack.
So across the globe, on basically all continents that we work on, the biggest threats are land use change, right? Knocking down the forest, putting in pasture for cattle, mostly cattle. That is probably the biggest conversion that's happening. The second would be for palm oil. Palm oil production across the globe. It's extraordinary how much land is converted for palm oil. And then if you look, just anything you use at home has palm oil in it, right? It's an extraordinary product, I have to really say, what you can do with palm oil. So this land conversion for agriculture and mostly for pasture, for meat production is number one. Climate change, of course, has converted landscapes on a scale that we've never, and at a speed that we've never seen before, and seascapes, just simply changing the temperature of the oceans and the coastal areas. I'm going to, I'll save some for you, but I just want to say one thing. It's all about the practices, the behaviors, and the policies that we've put in place, we humans, right? This is not, we are doing this with wide open eyes, and just, it really is extraordinary how successful we are at destroying, and it's not supposed to be down. We also have some good solutions, right? But it is extraordinary how good we are at destroying things.
I'll just add a couple other ways we destroy things. Although I totally agree with land use changes. Another driver of biodiversity decline is pollution, and another would be invasive species. So invasive species is a significant problem all over the world. Those could be invasive plant species, invasive animal species, or dare I say, invasive microbes.
You dare? Okay. I think from me, I'll stick with the oceans. Coral reefs are dying. I was just out in Saudi Arabia just before the war started. And the Red Sea, when we dive there, most of the reefs are dead already. And, you know, the life is clinging on. There are fantastic ways to help make them more resilient. We can get to that later. But that's a major problem. They are epicenters of biodiversity on the planet, epicenters that are incredibly important for all of the fish stocks that we feed off of. So again, if you don't care about biodiversity, care about the fish that you might be eating for dinner or for breakfast. These are vital resources for millions, if not billions, of people around the planet. And we are killing them. Why? Because of the heat. We hear the heat all the time. These heat waves are real. You saw temperatures in the Gulf of Mexico as getting up to 102 degrees Fahrenheit, which even in my European ancestry is very, very hot. And I don't even turn my hot tub up that hot. So that's ridiculous, right? The oceans, the current level of heat absorption by the oceans is reaching critical mass. We're currently at around the same amount of heat energy as equivalent to multiple nuclear weapons being exploded into the top 100 meters of the ocean every single second for the last 25 years. That's how much heat energy is going into the ocean. At a certain point, that's going to hit criticality. And when it does, ain't no more heat going down into the water. It's all going to be stuck up in the atmosphere. And then you get extreme, very rapid runaway problems. So this is not academic, it's visceral, it's real, and we need solutions now. We need opportunities now to take advantage of tech development, to take advantage of the technologies that we can get our hands on so that we can all have a world to actually exist in. That'd be nice.
This was sobering on purpose. One of the things that I personally love and have always loved about being a scientist and being part of a community of scientists is that as long as I've been a scientist, my colleagues have had the solutions to some of Earth's most pressing issues, like the ones we've just heard about. Step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, indefinite. We know exactly what to do to reverse or fix these issues. Whether or not policymakers and governments and economists are able to make that happen or choose to make that happen is really the issue. But we know what to do, we know what we can do, and we know how to create a very different trajectory than the one that we're on. I find that incredibly helpful in terms of maintaining my optimism and my morale. It's one of the things that keeps me in science and one of the things that allows me to give science and scientists my deepest respect. So right now we're going to jump into some of those exciting solutions that you probably don't know about because they are innovations of the last couple of years. And as the co-host of Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, I had the extreme privilege to travel to the San Diego Zoo and get a behind-the-scenes tour of what they call the Frozen Zoo. We're going to show you a tiny clip of that episode that aired on NBC that you can still watch on Peacock. And then we're going to chat about the Frozen Zoo in more detail and talk about some of the other incredible innovations coming out of these institutions. So if you can direct your attention to the screen. And if we can get some volume.
Whoa! Boom, 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 boom. Oh, I love rhinos. They are beautiful.
It's all possible because their cells have been frozen in time here at the Frozen Zoo, along with the black-footed ferrets. This one-of-a-kind facility acts as a genetic time machine and could help bring back endangered or even extinct species in the future.
The Frozen Zoo is the largest, most diverse collection of its kind, and it's a collection of skin cells from mammals, birds, reptiles, and amphibians.
That's really incredible. Why skin cells? Why are they so important and useful?
That's a great question. The skin cells can be used for all kinds of genetic rescue of a species, and we can also clone from these cells.
So that sounds like science fiction, but it is actually science, proper science, that can save some of these species from extinction.
Right. We have the cells from the black-footed ferret, Elizabeth Ann, if you'd like to see those.
I would love to see it. What a story. I mean, the first cloned black-footed ferret originated from cells that were housed right in this room?
Exactly, yes.
That's amazing. My goodness. Oh, this is a really cool moment. It really is. This is awesome.
You can read that.
Black-footed ferret.
So that's a pellet of cells, and there's 1 to 3 million living cells in there. DNA is non-living, but the living cells are why they can contribute to cloning.
Wow. And the only way to keep them alive is to keep them frozen like this?
Exactly. So how did we get Elizabeth Ann? She's a clone of a ferret named Willa, a ferret that had never reproduced from 1988.
From 1988.
Think of all the animals that were alive 50 years ago that have died, but we have their cells. For example, we have the cells of 12 northern white rhinos. There are only 2 alive today. We have 3 extinct species. It is amazing technology.
Marlis, I have to just ask, is there an emotional element for you to kind of hold some of potentially the future of a whole species in your hands, literally, at times? What does it feel like?
Do you want to feel what it feels like?
Yes, is that an option? Yes.
Okay, if you hold your hand over the liquid nitrogen here, what does that say?
It says, female black-footed ferret, March 1988. Wow.
So you're holding living cells of an animal that has passed away, but these cells have the genetic diversity that will help the population.
Honestly, it feels like hope, is what it feels like. Its cells are alive and useful. It's really hopeful. Thank you all. It still feels like hope. I believe. And so Nadine, will you talk to us a little bit more about the Frozen Zoo? If you are fortunate enough to travel to San Diego, we highly recommend you check out the zoo and the safari park and the Wildlife Alliance. However, the Frozen Zoo is off limits to the public, and for very good reason. Can you tell us a little bit more?
Sure. So our Frozen Zoo is really an insurance policy for nature. It contains over 11,000 individual samples from over 1,600 different species. It's the largest and most diverse bank of its kind in the world. And what makes this biobank unique, and the Frozen Zoo in particular, is the amount of living cell lines and reproductive material that's stored in that bank. And those samples and all the metadata that goes along with that living organism is what really makes those samples valuable. And those samples contribute to conservation efforts through things like genetic rescue. So you heard about the black-footed ferret being cloned. I wanted to share with you another story of how we're using our biobank to save species. And this is about kelp forest recovery. So I think since 2013, we've lost 85% of the kelp forests along the California coast. Kelp forests are the lungs of the ocean. They produce oxygen, they absorb carbon dioxide, they are home for hundreds of species. They support livelihoods through fisheries, and they also protect our shoreline from storms and erosion. So they're really important. They're declining because of imbalances of the ecosystem, global warming, and human activities. And in particular, they're suffering from a resurgence of purple sea urchins. These are voracious eaters of kelp. Well, why are the sea urchins increasing when we're talking about decline? Well, what has declined is the predators that regulate sea urchins in the environment, and those are sea otters and sunflower sea stars. So we've been working with our partners at Scripps and the Birch Aquarium on saving reproductive material from sunflower sea stars. We've been able to successfully freeze and thaw the sperm from many different individual sea stars. And it sounds, like not difficult, but I'm here to tell you it took over 100 different experimental trials to figure out how to do this and be able to successfully thaw that sperm afterwards and have it still be living.
Nadine, I beg to differ. Thawing out sea star sperm does sound difficult. I think we believe you.
Okay. Oh, thanks for that. Now I lost my train of thought here. Anyway, I should say, sea star populations are on decline for some of the same reasons the kelp forests are on the decline, which is the warming oceans and human activities. But there's also a sea star wasting disease that has decimated the populations. And in fact, I just read that over 5 billion sea stars have succumbed to this disease alone. So we're working to bring back the sea stars so that we can recover that kelp ecosystem. So using our frozen genetic material from the males, the Birch Aquarium had a female. The sea stars are functionally extinct, so they don't live in the wild. We're fortunate to have access through the Birch Aquarium. And we were able to use the genetic material from the male, the sperm, and inseminate the eggs of the female during a natural spawning event. And we harvested 170 vials of baby sea stars. Each of those vials has 100 to 200 sea stars inside of it. So that's a really successful event. And what we've done with the larvae is distribute them to multiple aquariums around California who will cultivate them to adulthood. And then we're also saving many of those vials in our frozen zoo so they could be used for future efforts. And then just to finish the story, we just submitted a proposal to conserve 5 species of kelp in our frozen zoo and to do whole genome sequencing on those varieties. And that allows us to do some, assess the heat stress and the ability of the different kelp species to withstand different temperatures, so that if and when we want to propagate kelp and reseed the oceans, we'll know which ones are going to survive best due to current temperatures. So real quickly, I just want to share 2 other slides with you. This first one is because this is my favorite bird, so I just wanted everyone to see how beautiful this thick-billed parrot is and call your attention to the 4-gram solar-powered satellite transmitter that's on its back. And this is attached to the bird using a Kevlar backpack design. This was tested at the San Diego Zoo. The bird, despite its huge beak, did not destroy the transmitter, and the bird's mate also did not remove the device from the bird. So we tested it. We successfully deployed this in thick-billed parrot native habitat, or the parrots only exist in the high elevation pine forests of northern Mexico. Only place in the world, one place where they exist today. We've been working with our colleagues in Mexico and have successfully deployed probably close to 100 transmitters on the birds. And what this has allowed us to do is delineate for the very first time the migratory route of a thick-billed parrot. And why this is important is the bird has only been studied in the northernmost breeding area, which is just 50 miles south of the US border, but we didn't know how far they extended. And this type of information is really useful because the birds live in the forests. The forests are under lots of pressure due to legal and illegal logging, climate change, devastating fires, and pine beetle infestations. And so we're able to give this data about the thick-billed parrots' migratory route and their wintering area to managers as well as government agencies who can then use those data and put laws in place or protections in place to protect the forest, not just for the birds, but for all the species and the human communities that depend on that forest. So it brings me to my point, which is that data is only good if someone uses it. And so we collect a lot of data, and we want to make sure that that data gets into the hands of those that can use it to make decisions and to manage their natural resources. And the next slide, I'll go a lot quicker, is because this is just a really cool photo. This is an orca from the Salish Sea, which is off the Washington coast. This is a resident population, very threatened population that is under a lot of threats because of pollution in that ocean. We were able to use a drone and attach a petri dish to the drone, fly it through the expired air or the spray from an orca as it exhales, and culture it, Jack, to get an idea of the microbial flora so we know what's normal, what's not normal. Again, this is a very small population of whales, and we give those data to the wildlife health professionals that are overseeing that population. So if we were to detect a disease in the whales, we could individually treat them. So I just wanted to share that with you, and now I'll turn this back to my colleagues.
I think that's pretty major. Can we get a round of applause for some of those ecosystem and species-saving innovations? I mean, again, one of the things I'm hearing is that there are species out there that are extinct in the wild. And the only reason we're not saying that they're extinct in entirety is because their cells and their propagules are cryogenically frozen at the frozen zoo here so that scientists can figure out how to bring them back into the wild. That's really major, and it's one of the things that is a solution for all of the issues that we're facing today. We've got more of these coming, so I'd love, Chris, if you can talk to us about what WCS is up to.
Yeah, thanks. So one of the things, we were talking about land use change and how that would impact, and Nadine has just brought up how disease impacts wildlife populations and then biodiversity. So a lot of our work at the WCS has been for decades, on looking at these ever-increasing interfaces, so these contact areas where livestock, humans, and wildlife interact. Some of them are the effect of land conversion, right? So you encroach into a forest and bring cattle into contact with wildlife that live in that forest. That's one. We do a few more things as well, which are a lot more egregious, right? We go out and capture wildlife. We capture wildlife, bring them into city centers, cities where there's millions of people, and have live wildlife markets where animals from the entire world are traded and are in contact with tens of thousands of people. If you try to get a permit to do a research where you say, I want to have a research, I'm going to get 10 different species of wildlife, I'll put them in this room here with all of us, we'll lock you all in here, and we'll just let these animals exchange poop and blood, and every now and then someone will walk in and slaughter one, and you're all exposed to this. You would never, ever, ever get a permit to do that. But we're doing this in hundreds of sites around the world, right? So we spent a lot of work, and I'll use the next two slides just to examine it. Developing technology that enables us to go to these front lines of spillover where pathogens that are either impacting wildlife or humans are occurring. In the past, so when I started working, we would have to take those samples, we would send them across half of the world to some lab and have them analyzed there. A lot of permitting, lots of problems with inequity as well about taking these samples from the global south, for example, and bringing it into the global north. And it would take months before the communities and the people who were most impacted by these pathogens would ever get results. Nowadays, what you can see here, for example, Ebola virus is something we've been working for a long time. Ebola virus, as you know, is problematic, of course, and has massive impacts for human population, but also has massive impacts for gorilla populations. There's been massive die-offs of western lowland gorillas due to Ebola virus. So having a co-benefit, we monitor, since over 20 years in 600 communities in Congo, wildlife carcasses. And the difference is, when we started the project, it would take 3 months to get a result. When we found a carcass, took the samples, had to send it to the capitals, had to come back to the US or to Europe, and so on. Now, we have little PCR machines, which are literally the size of my phone, and in 30 minutes, we're testing for the presence of Ebola virus, testing for the presence of anthrax virus. That's important, right? That's an early warning system, protects the wildlife, protects the human population as well. So these, all of you had to go through COVID as well. Do you remember sticking the swab up your nose, right? So while we're using these at the moment, we're still using little qPCR machines like this, or sequences. What's really exploded since COVID are these so-called lateral flow tests, right? Little swab, you put them in the little, your little test tube, and what is it, 2 minutes later you have a result, right? We now have lateral flow tests that we can use in the forest, right? They're super cheap, very quick, everyone can be trained to use them, right? So this has revolutionized the world. I remember starting, this was one of the big frustrations of waiting for months to get results. And then if we could just have the other one. The other thing that we have to do as well, of course, is a lot of the work that we do on the front lines in the wildlife directly benefits human health as well, right? So it's foundational that we know what's happening on these front lines. Remember, 70% of all emerging infectious disease are going to have their origin in wildlife. They'll either come from industrial food production, cattle, chickens, or pigs, but most likely the really interesting ones, the ones that are really going to cause a lot of problems, are going to come from wildlife. So knowing what's going on in wildlife and being able to diagnose and report and use the data to develop therapeutics, vaccines, and so on is essential. And that has really, really changed. It's extraordinary to think that I can sit 30 kilometers away from the nearest road in the middle of the forest with a community member with a satellite uplink and run a sequence. That was just unthinkable before. And those benefits and these technologies are not only used for animal diseases, they're also used for agriculture, they're used for testing soils, testing genetic variants in plants that farmers are putting out, and so on and so on. This has really been an extraordinarily fast revolution in technology and access that we have. So.
Thank you so much, Chris. I always think it's interesting that probably most people in the world will live their whole lives without ever speaking to a wildlife veterinarian. We have veterinarians all over the place for our pets, but wildlife veterinarians, like Chris and his colleagues, really can talk to us about all of the proactive things that are kind of invisibly happening around the world to keep wildlife and biodiversity safe, and the really important benefits that has to human health. I think we've had a big awakening since COVID.
And I just wanted to point out, right, you have really cool bats here in Austin. I don't know how many of you are from Austin, right? But I think if you saw this one, the hammer-headed bat, 450 grams, you'd kind of freak out. It's a really big bat. And
that's the bat's nose. I know it's kind of washed out here, but it has this like crinkly, fluttery nose.
It's the most amazing, right? And it makes a really loud noise all night. It never stops. Like you're banging with a hammer on an anvil. It just goes on all night. So that would be great here. I'm sure some of the people who've got condos down there would be really happy.
I will say already 2 of the 4 of us on this stage have visited the Bat Bridge here in Austin. If you have not visited it yet, highly recommend, but also keep your distance from bats, please. Let's talk about solutions.
Very quickly, 3 perfect solutions for leveraging microbes to help survive and keep ecosystems resilient against climate change. The first is we're taking 3D printed structures and impregnating them with bacteria that send out chemical signals to allow for zooxanthellae that make up the corals to hone in on these structures and make their little homes there, so you can rapidly restore an ecosystem like a coral reef from a basic structure to a living coral reef within inside of 2 years, which normally it can take a very, very long time. This is revolutionary because it already builds the system, puts it in place. Second, we're taking new technologies and creating microbial solutions to support the regeneration of our soils. So I said that soils were dying. We think we can regrow soils and regrow the productivity of our agricultural soils within inside 6 months to 1 year. In fact, this is so cool that we've got rock stars and movie stars. And I like to say the rock stars, we've ground them down to make them soil stars. So we've now got soil stars around the world who are taking up this challenge and putting their own money into developing these technologies. So these are real things which are happening right now. And finally, like we do with fecal microbiome transplants for humans, where we take feces from a healthy person and put it into a sick person, we're taking microbes from healthy environments and putting them into not a frozen zoo, but a frozen microbiology lab in a location which I can't tell you where it is. It's top secret. It's called the Microbiota Vault, but it's a way to conserve and preserve these ecosystems of microbiology so that in the future we can leverage them again. So rebuilding coral reefs, rebuilding our soils, and creating an ecosystem of preserved environments for the future, these are ways that we're taking microbiology and changing the world.
Amazing. I always kind of geek out, especially on your first example, which is using microbes to send signals underwater to other microbes to start building coral reefs really fast. We heard earlier about the importance of these corals, and it's just incredible. The minds that thought of this and tested it and figured it out are some of the world's heroes, truly. I hope everyone is gathering lots of questions. We have microphones in the middle, and we'll get to Q&A pretty soon. But one of the things that I want to make sure that we all have a chance to talk about are what else is needed, right? So there's been a lot of proactive work on behalf of these different scientific institutions, wildlife conservation institutions, to fix the problems of today and find solutions. But beyond that, like, what is our best case scenario for making these solutions more effective, quicker to roll out? I mean, what is one way that we can envision and reimagine how all of this works? I'm going to start with you and then let you all jump in.
The obvious thing for us is that the ability to get funding to make this happen relies upon mostly the federal and state governments of the United States. If we're looking just at the US and very similar in other countries, that's a drop in the proverbial ocean of financial capacity that's available to humanity. If we could access private equity and leverage that to drive forward funding for these research programs, we'd be looking at 3 to 4 to 5 orders of magnitude more money put into conserving and making our Earth more sustainable for humanity. If that's not important, I do not know what is. So we are trying to tackle ways to not just rely on the federal government, which has proven to be relatively unreliable, and state offices. We are now pushing towards embodying conservation as an enterprise, an industry that will facilitate us being able to leverage private equity to support these kinds of endeavors. That, I believe, is the only way we can push forward with enough speed to make this happen. If we can colonize Mars, we could probably do a good job at making Earth resilient to our colonization.
I really want to double down on this message that I believe the last I heard there was something like a $9 billion funding gap when it comes to wildlife conservation, which for our sector, that is an insane amount of money. But $9 billion when we look at, other kinds of industries or just the markets in general is something that we can harness.
And that's an underestimation. I want to point that out. That's a conservative at $9 billion. Well, I would put 2 zeros on that at least. I want $1 trillion. I want $1 trillion in funding in the next 5 years to really put a dent in this problem.
And
me personally, $1 trillion.
I would take, if there was any million, billion, trillion amount of money to put towards saving this planet. I do believe that it is the right thing to do. But again, just furthering this message that this can become an industry. We can dedicate percentages of high net worth individuals or different groups' portfolios towards investing in nature, and there can be returns on this. I mean, it can be highly profitable and solutions forward. And nature finance and nature investing is something that is really emerging. It's absolutely necessary, and there's a lot of opportunity for individuals, for foundations, for governments, and for industries to get involved in this. And we are all happy to talk to you about that more after this session. Do you have anything to add, Chris?
Yeah, I just take a step back. I mean, I think one of the key issues that we need to address, and this is one where I really don't have a solution. I'm very optimistic, and we're on the track to get there. But one of the issues and why this is not seen as such a good investment is because we think it's free, right? Nature and the services it provides, these foundational services that we live on, all of us are dependent on this, us and all future generations are dependent on this. It's free. We're not paying. You're not paying enough, at least, for your clean water and the air and the biodiversity and the bacteria and so on and so forth. The moment you start paying that or are taxed on some of these things, then the return of investment really makes a lot of sense, of course, right? Because then you can invest it and you're getting that service back. So I think this is something that needs to fundamentally change. We do need to value and pay for the services we get from nature. We can't let NGOs like ourselves raise money from private individuals and public money to provide the services to industry, entrepreneurs and whatnot, so that they can make products if the planet's getting too hot. Remember, preserving the forests tackles about 30% of the impacts of climate change. If those forests were not there, it would be a lot warmer, right? but we're seen as a very niche. They're doing conservation somewhere far away. That's not the way it works. It's fundamental for everything else that's happening at the same time. So we need to change that equation and value that nature. We need to find a way to value it and pay for it.
Nadine, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. And while Nadine is sharing with us her thoughts, we'd love to have anyone come up to the microphone to get ready for Q&A.
I think I'd like to take another step back and just reinforce the message that nature is the best biobank in the world. There really is no replacing nature. Yes, we can restore ecosystems, but you know, it would be a whole lot cheaper and faster if we just didn't destroy it in the first place. So I think that's a key message I'd like everyone to leave with, and also that conservation is really a team sport and collaboration is key. And nature is everyone's business. And we really need to involve commercial businesses and financial systems into the conservation sector. We really need all hands on deck.
Thank you so much. We're going to transition to Q&A, and I would love to have our first person. If we could get the mic on.
Hello. Thank you. That's really interesting and heartwarming to hear these good examples. A lot of them involved using life or biological technologies, you know, like fire fights fire, and life is often like the best, most precise way to help other life. But biological innovation has different risk profiles than like software, and we've seen how much value can be created when entrepreneurs can just hack away and build software. I'm really curious of what thoughts you have around like how can we democratize biological hacking and innovation in the same way that we've done for software? So, for example, have you seen promising routes with like world models or any other ways that individual innovators and entrepreneurs can get involved? Like how do we kind of replicate the software ecosystem for biology? Thanks.
Oh, I know we have answers to that.
I mean, this is a really, really important piece. Number one, we need ethical controls in place to make sure that we don't run away with a Margaret Atwood-style Oryx and Crake future, right? If anyone's not read that book, go and read that book. It's vital to your success. But creating a software ecosystem is going to be incredibly important for ensuring that we have the opportunity to not only leverage the expertise in that market sector, but also to support some of the technological innovations which are making it so successful. So, you know, we're creating digital twins of ecosystems. I know that's a horrible term and not quite an accurate term, but it's an effective measure of how to leverage machine learning and AI-based infrastructure to facilitate, say, creating a more effective market equity program around a region that you want to bring tourism into. Right, so that you can ensure that there's a preservation angle, a biodiversity enrichment angle, a restoration and resiliency angle, as well as ensuring that people can actually make money, local and private equity, to support the development of that region. That's where software engineering, for example, can be incredibly valuable, right? Supporting the development of these ecosystems of tools that enable us to be able to analyze and assess the best, most predictive software opportunities out there.
Yeah, I want to double down and say that probably for all of us, when we are presenting our work, we're talking about the parrots and, for me, the bears and the microbes, but a lot of our work is in statistical modeling, data modeling, I mean, using software that was invented for something else to predict different ecosystem outcomes, play with it, and project future trajectories. And so that it's imperative that software continues to be developed for these purposes.
Sorry, I probably didn't ask my question clearly enough. I'm really asking not how we use software to support the work that you're doing. It's more like there's CRISPR, there's increasingly kind of right, like home biolab stuff that could, in theory,
hence no Oryx and Crake. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, how can we solve for that? Is it like community biolabs? Is it like, do we have to try and just model this stuff in software and then like send it off to some like lab to print and trial. Because at the moment it feels like I love biology, I love tech. At the moment it feels like unless I'm Eli Lilly or Roche or whatever, like there's just no point trying to like get involved with that. It's like too regulatory, it's too capital intensive, and that's totally the opposite of software, right? Anyone can get going, anyone can start.
Yeah, go on then. I could argue that point.
So it's a really, really interesting point, and it's actually very timely as well, right? Because we're at a sort of a, when it comes to pathogens at least, right, and vaccines and therapeutics, we're at a really critical moment at the moment. After 3 years of negotiations, right, in the end of last year, in May of last year, we created the pandemic agreement. This is the first international binding agreement on preventing pandemics. But it's not ratified, and it's not going to be ratified till the pathogen access and benefit sharing annex is going to be agreed on. So at the moment, what we're seeing, and this makes it much more difficult, of course, is the global south, to just generalize, right? Countries like South Africa, Namibia, Brazil, who provided sequences as a commons to the world, got absolutely no benefits of doing that, right? They had to beg to get their vaccines, whereas the pharmaceutical companies, well-regulated, the ones you're talking about and others, had produced the vaccine, which was a good business as well, right? It saved our lives, but it's also a good business. So the biohacking, this sort of garage approach has these massive ethical problems as well. Where are you getting the resources? Who's going to share the benefits? So it's really tricky. And we note that's one of the reasons why we do these frontline diagnostics in the country with the community, so that this is clear. We're doing this together for the benefit of this community, and there's all kind of other processes around that, right? So I think the biohacking part, that's a real constraint where it's difficult to get into.
Please stick around if you don't mind. I have a response for you as well that might be encouraging, and probably Nadine does, so if you don't mind. And I want to make sure we have time for your question.
I was wondering if you could do a little speculation. So it's like 100 years from now, how might your science and your initiatives be used, maybe in a surprising way that you haven't spoken about yet? Any of you or all?
I mean, we are creating ecosystems, right? I said that, preserving and creating them. So I have this vision of creating little, what I refer to now as bioballs, which sounds really bad in British, but these are little ecosystems that are self-contained seeding pods that can be delivered into damaged environments to facilitate rapid restoration potential, powered by microbiology, of course, because it's the most important thing in the world, but containing all of the seeds, the ovules, the spermatozoa, all of the components that would require that ecosystem to be replenished and restored. And that would move us from having 10 to 20 years decadal restoration potential back down to small potential. Because I don't think we can change humanity. I think we're a bit chaotic, and I think our current ecosystem proves that quite nicely. So instead of trying to change people, I want to be able to provide people with tools to protect ecosystems and restore them after we damage them. I also like science fiction, so it's cool.
Let's fit your question in.
Pretend that I've got several $1 billion to invest, and I'm interested in the regeneration of soils in the U.S. Midwest, for example. Explain to me exactly how I profit on my investment.
So number one, if you're an agricultural landholder, then you'll profit on the investment by significantly increasing the profit margins for the food productivity off of that system. Number two, you're improving the water holding capacity of that environment, which allows for restoration of aquifers. Therefore, you can profit off of the selling of water rights in those particular ecosystems. Number 3, you're actually creating two new bioeconomies, both carbon economy and biodiversity economy opportunities, which can create a market economy around a protected sector. So either increased carbon or increased biodiversity, both microbial and macrobial, ecosystem restoration potential. So you can create multiple market opportunities that can drive profit margins for even 100 acres of land.
And depending on which ecosystem you are thinking of investing in, there are some tree species that are fast growing that can sequester carbon as they grow, be cut down in a strategy that is okay for the ecosystem so that you're able to sell some timber to a global market and continue to sequester carbon at the same time, as well as create biodiversity credits and carbon credits. We can talk because there are organizations, there are groups that have modeled this out that are already taking investors in this way, and investors are seeing returns.
But are you saying that this regeneration system, you can have it right now cheaper than the fertilizers that are used now?
The microbial ones, absolutely. Yeah, in fact, we are, for every dollar of fertilizer you would put in, we're talking about putting in 0.001 cents of bacteria for the same qualitative output. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. The only thing standing in our way is politics. And it's politics and money markets that don't want to change.
A lot of time we as conservation scientists get asked about hope. What keeps us hopeful? Why haven't we given up? And like I shared earlier, it is the fact that in my work I'm surrounded by scientists who have the solutions. We can start immediately with these solutions and we can project a really beautiful future. I want to give our panelists an opportunity to just give their one final thought. I suggested that they give a quote because quotes are going to allow you all to remember them and talk about them in all your happy hours tonight. The quote that I will start with is, I always thought it was attributed to Winston Churchill, and apparently it's not. But it's a general philosophy that says there's no such thing as wasted effort. I think that a lot of the solutions that are already being enacted now is proactive instead of reactive, and I believe that it can really save us.
Be the change you want to be, and you want to see in the world. That, to me, is incredibly important.
I'm going to break with a quote because I did want to answer. I think thing to think about as you go home is the world is changing so fast, but one thing that's really changing is demographics. Human population is decreasing at a rate, it's unbelievable, right? How fast that is dropping, and we're urbanizing. A lot of land is becoming available, right? So that gives me a lot of hope for the future.
Do you have a quote, though? Do you want to offer a quote?
Well, I have a quote, but it's not hopeful, but maybe it is. Maybe you can make it hopeful. And it is that the greatest threat the greatest threat our planet is facing is the idea that someone else will save it. So again, I hope you can leave this room thinking about what you're going to do to help save our planet.
Thank you all so much. We're going to hang out if you'd like to chat with us. Thank you.